So welcome back to another episode of the Car Injury Doctors Network, and specifically what that is, it's a group of doctors that have been trained in what's called high sensitivity, high relevancy documentation, essentially to stop low ball offers and to support policy limit awards. And the topic today is a very hot topic. It's how the doctor's cervical sprain diagnosis is forcing personal injury attorneys to accept low ball offers again. It's how the doctor's cervical sprain strain diagnosis is forcing attorneys to accept low ball offers. Now, obviously, that can be a big topic. We're going to hit on the major components right here of how that's happening and how it can stop from happening. So, again, we're the Car Injury Doctor Network and our providers. And what makes us very different and unique is we do what's called high relevancy testing, high sensitivity testing that's medically accepted. We take that documentation, we put it into the 12-step categories that builds the case, tells the story, and builds the case for the narrative report. And if it goes to a deposition or trial, we have a 25-step formula to how that works. And this is the formula, this is the documentation and formula, specifically how I've never lost a case in court when testifying on behalf of a patient. And some of the results, and actually the big case that started all this, that kind of turned my eyes open to what's going on in personal injury and low ball offers, is when I took a case that the attorney, I explained this to the attorney, and he had a case of a 33-year-old woman with a soft tissue injury, been to the emergency room, been to the doctor. Both of them said there was nothing wrong with her. She was still having back problems, and they didn't offer her anything. And I took the case, and I did what's called high relevancy, high sensitivity documentation. In other words, we actually did the documentation that shows the injury. And we put that in there in our 12-step narrative report formula, did a deposition, and we took the case from zero to a policy limit of $110,000. And that's a case with no fracture. It was a soft tissue injury, that's all. There was no fracture, no broken bones, no nerve damage, no dislocation, no mild concussion. And the reason I point that out is that's the majority of the cases. The soft tissue injury is, according to the Insurance Research Council, that's 87% of all cases. Only a disc injury is only 32%. A nerve injury is only 16%. A mild concussion is 2%. A fractures, mild concussion is 10%, and a fracture is 2%. So the point is, that's the majority of the cases. And the format of documenting that soft tissue is the format that significantly increases all the other injury awards, whether all the other injuries, disc, nerve, mild concussion, fracture, all the components. So let's go ahead and get right into this, how this works. So and again, this outline on the board isn't really meant to be legible. It's just for me to kind of remind me what we need to be focused on. So let me say up front, again, this is from a doctor's perspective. It's not a legal perspective. But let me also say that there's absolutely nothing wrong with a cervical sprain strain diagnosis if that's all the patient has. And that's not typically the case. And that's where the problem comes in. And let me go over with you how that works. Remember, there's 5 major categories of what are called financial drivers. There's a lot of little stuff, but there's 5 big categories, which is, it starts with the injury diagnosis. In other words, that's the single most valuable component of the injury award, period. Number 2, the impairment. That's the second most important value driver for an injury award, the impairment. Number 3 is the loss of enjoyment of duties, loss of enjoyment of activities of daily living, and duties under duress. Now those two, what are those two? Those are when you have pain and restrictions with activities of daily living. Because remember, the absolute core, the two pinnacle components of the injury award is, did the patient suffer an impairment, and how did it cause pain and restrictions with activities of daily living? Those are the single 2 most components that need to be documented. Now, having said that, let's go into why when the attorneys, and I'm seeing this happen a lot, attorneys are getting documentation from doctors that are basically saying cervical sprain strain, and then there's a lot of other documentation that should follow that's not, but it all starts with that bad diagnosis. And let me share with you why that's a bad diagnosis, and it forces the attorney into the lowball offer. So if these are the financial drivers, the diagnosis, the impairment, loss of... Now remember, the amount of documentation you have in these categories from your doctor will determine whether it's a low ball, no offer, low ball offer, high ball offer, or policy limit award. And remember that documentation and how much it's fulfilled will determine 4 injury awards: medicals, impairment, pain and suffering, and need for future care. So that's where we stand. So let's go ahead and take a look at, start with the diagnosis, because that's where everything's at. And a lot of times the doctors will put cervical sprain strain as the primary diagnosis. And soon as that happens, and that's the beginning, that's essentially the beginning of the low ball offer right there. And let me share with you why that a lot of the attorneys don't know. As a matter of fact, a lot of the doctors don't know this. So, and again, why do I say this? Again, I'm Dr. Paul. I've opened 77 offices in 20 states, speaker in 3 chiropractic colleges, teach personal injury and continuing legal education to doctors and attorneys, authored 10 books now, and never lost a case in court when using this formula. So that's what our car injury doctor network providers do. They use this formula. And it reminds me of when I asked attorneys, how much personal injury did they know in law school and how much was taught. They typically laugh. Well, the same thing's happening in chiropractic and medical school, but the attorneys don't know that. So I always say the doctors come out and they're in a state of unconscious incompetence relative to the documentation of these soft tissue injury awards. The attorney doesn't know, the doctor doesn't know, the doctor doesn't know what he doesn't know. So he does bad documentation, gives it to the attorney. The attorney thinks that that's all there is to it, when in fact, most of the time, it's bad documentation, and that's what we're going to get into right now, and that's what forces the low ball offer.